Islamic fighting group, I think they start to learn that lesson and they act based on this. Anyway, what's the significance of that period under Gaddafi before the revolution? If you'd like to summarize, it helped the Islamists to build their legitimacy. Because they claim we are the only people fought head-to-head against Colonel Gaddafi for 30 years. We sacrificed everything. No one can deny that. So we are a very legitimate group, even if we are not representative. Then we have the revolution. The revolution, I think it's, as it's been mentioned before, it starts, I think, by people that are very liberal. They are, most of them lawyers, by the way, the people, they ended up in 15 February Benghazi, before the courthouse in Benghazi. Most of them, if not all of them, they were lawyers. Okay, and all of them liberals, activists in terms of human rights. And they, at the first 2 days, they asked only for like radical reform, not throwing Colonel Gaddafi's regime. They asked for a real reform, like a real, genuine political process, allowing, you know, like different political parties to be established in Libya, a real constitution, all these kind of like democratic values as well. Anyway, when the revolution, you know, because of Colonel Gaddafi, as the ambassador mentioned, you know, we expected that. He was a very mad person, you know, and he don't accept that at all. Anyone to challenge him within the Libyan territory. So as expected, you know, he launched, I think, a full-scale war against his own people. It was as simple as that, and he was in his way to massacre Benghazi on the face of earth and to wipe it out on the face of earth. Thank God, you know, the international community intervened right, you know, on the 19th of March to save tens of thousands, I believe, of innocent lives, than the rest of the Libyans. Because I can't imagine if Gaddafi really managed to make it and re-establish himself as a ruler in Libya. I think it's going to be very, very painful 40, maybe 50 years for the Libyans, including with the rulership of his son or his tribe, because they were really mad and they had a plan to just make everyone pay a very heavy price for that uprising. So thank God, I think we should not confuse what happened on the 19th of March with what's going on now. I strongly believe, as a Libyan, it's a different issue. What happened on the 19th of March to stop a large-scale massacre in the 21st century, it was a very, very perfect job. Decision has been made by very brave international leaders. The Islamists, they used, just to make a long story short, a few tactics to make themselves very powerful, and they outscale the rest. How to organize, which is their business. The rest, they have no experience how to organize, the liberals, the pro-democratic forces. The Islamists, they spend the last 40 years, you know, keep organizing and reorganizing everywhere in the world, because they know without any organization you will never ever going to make it, and you will never ever going to survive. But the way how they establish their organizations in a different forms, you know, before you have the typical structure like Al-Qaeda, Jama'ah al-Islamiyya, TTP in Pakistan, whatever, in Indonesia, Jama'ah al-Islamiyya, wherever you go. But in Libya it was different one, which is Katiba, the militias, and they were at the hardcore of the revolution itself, for example. Then they come up with something which is a very, very different idea, which is the Halifat, alliances. Even with states. I know a lot of my friends, they used to believe that it's against Islam itself to make any alliances with, especially like Arab states, because they believe they are not legitimate, but they've been forced during the revolution to forge very strong alliance with different states, not just like groups, and very strong, I think, mutual understanding happened, which is maybe at the time was a historical one, between the jihadists and the Muslim Brotherhood, took place in Turkey, 17th of April, 2011. It was a second meeting for 3 days there just to make like a mutual understanding, because I don't know if you're aware of that, usually the Muslim Brotherhood and the jihadists, they hate each other more than the rest. And they don't accept each other. So it's either or. But within the context of the Libyan revolution, they managed successfully to make like a peace treaty until getting rid of Colonel Gaddafi, and then we'll see what's going to happen. Then it's secrecy again. It's being used in a different one. I can call it like from a secrecy to the way how they reinterpreting secrecy. I can call it maybe a camouflage. You're never ever going to see them physically, but you are certain they are there, they're fighting, they're killing people, they occupied a lot of like military facilities, but it was very difficult really to pinpoint them. only few names, because of the work from the Gaddafi intelligence service, they leaked their files to many media in the West, and to some like intelligence services in the West as well. So some names they appeared, like some ex-Gitmo mates, you know, they are well known, this guy was in Guantanamo, whatever. But despite there were thousands of them, no one managed really to identify them specifically or even where there's places. So it's from secrecy to camouflage. Then the division of labor between the Muslim Brotherhood and the rest. And it was like, it's not necessarily was based on agreement, but the Muslim Brotherhood, they were very good and perfect in terms of like, established themselves at the hardcore of the management of the revolution, including with the NTC and the executive office, as well led by Dr. Jibril. And the jihadists, they did the muscle work on the ground. So they take over all the militias and the katibas on the ground. Then, post-Qadhafi, and I will finish here, it's, their appearance, it's in different forms. We have many political parties, including for ex-jihadists, like Al-Ummah, the nation, which is led by Mr. Saadi, who was the spiritual leader of the LIFG. He used to live in London. There's Al-Watan, which is maybe the homeland, you can call it, for Mr. Belhaj, ex-leader of the LIFG as well. And there's Al-Asala wal-Hadara for the Salafist group or semi-Salafists as well. There's the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Adala wal-Binan, Justice and Construction. But anyway, it's just held to be established by the Muslim Brotherhood because, according to my knowledge, only less than 30% of Al-Adala wal-Binan, Justice and Construction, they are Muslim Brotherhood members. Or less than 30%, but the rest is just like a normal Libyans. Maybe they share with them the same agenda or the same point of view. And the most dangerous thing happening post-Qadhafi, and still ongoing process now, it's monopolizing the legitimate violence. There is a real pattern now, led by the Islamists, to monopolize who's going to be in charge of using legitimate violence. To do that, you have to occupy and control entirely two different sectors, the defense sector and the security sector. If you ask me about my assessment, I think they are very close, you know. If what's going on now, taking the momentum, and it's going like this, I think just maybe by the end of the year, they will do it. They will manage to do that. The future of Libya will be decided by two things, two issues, Islam and tribalism.
Well, on that rather macabre note, let's thank Noman for some great personal insights and experiences, and for summing up so much of what has happened in Libya over the last years, and open things up to about 30 minutes of question and answer. Thank you. Teo, why not start us off?
I'm certainly not an expert on Libya, but after we first met, I was encouraged to read a book by Professor Duval, who gave me the impression that when Gaddafi started in '68, he tried to engage the country in a political process, and he failed. And I was wondering, and he failed. Then, Libya is a massively rich oil country. The oil wealth was piling up, and that gave Gaddafi the ability to do things that without all that money he would not be able to do. And the political process in the country itself proved to be so slow that he lost patience and ended up engaging in his various escapades in Africa and worldwide, doing all kinds of crazy things. And I was wondering whether what is happening now is comparable to what happened in the early years of Gaddafi, where there's a lot of political interest in different constituencies in the country, but that at one point people will look at, well, we've got this massive amount of money coming in. Somebody is going to grab that and basically over time end up creating a similar authoritarian figure in Libya as Gaddafi became. It's a question. I was wondering what the panel was thinking.
Okay. Maybe I'll take a first stab at this and then I'll pass it off. There's no doubt that Colonel Gaddafi initiated a political process and that the only reason he was able to pursue his scheme of Jamahiriya or his ideology as put forth in the Green Book was the massive oil revenues that accrued to him. In fact, it has been described that the ideas of the Green Book against private property, or no wage earners, only partners, no renters, only owners, were enforced in a way which was anti-economical. They essentially destroyed the economic life of Libya in the 1980s. And they were only able to happen because Gaddafi had enough money to placate opposition and to keep the country running, because the actual domestic economy was irrelevant to his control of the country. I do not, however, believe that a political process with as pie-in-the-sky, unimplementable goals as that is happening now. I also don't believe that there's a grab for power merely to control the spigot of oil wealth. I think that the political processes that are happening now in the country are not purely ideological, but are a struggle between different social, religious, ethnic, and regional groups to have their moment in the sun.
How much time do you allow them?
I can't speculate on that. The hope, of course, is that there's enough of the pieces of the pie that if everyone shares their piece of the pie, there'll be more pie for everyone. So that the struggle of, I'm a Berber, the Berbers haven't gotten enough, we're going to capture the parliament this week and demand that there needs to be at least 2 Berber ministers in the cabinet. For example, that happened a year ago. That struggle decreases the amount of pie there is for everyone. But I'll pass the question off to maybe, who prefers to answer? You first?
No, I agree with that. Just a couple of observations. I think some of the sequence of things you discussed were not necessarily linked. I think Gaddafi's role in Africa, for example, grew out of his frustration. He grew up under the influence of Nasser. Libya was never a big enough stage for him. He wanted to be a regional leader. He wanted to be a pan-Arab leader first, but he fell out with all the other Arab leaders and was rejected, so he turned to Africa as the next stage where he thought he could become a great regional leader. I agree with Jason. I think his political process developed at different points, but it was never really thought through. It was never a full ideology that he was trying to implement. He kept adapting it, and got a huge boost after the 1973 rise in the oil prices and the steep increase in revenues. He suffered a real blow in the 1990s with international economic sanctions, which really drove the economy into a pretty dreadful state. So there came a point, and that perhaps explains the opening up, where he couldn't continue. The country was in such a parlous state, in spite of the oil revenues, that his ideology was no longer credible, and he could no longer meet people's aspirations.
It was exactly on that point that I drafted one talk that I didn't give to explain how I came about something like the idea to study Libya, or the idea behind the book, and it was exactly this process of studying Gaddafi's ideology in the 80s and 90s, and then studying the many apologies done after 2003 to justify the move towards the West, the move towards globalization, that made me think of the case study with China, right? What Gaddafi has done, or tried to do, was to stay intact his political structures while changing entirely his economic ideology. Miraculously, the Chinese Communist state has managed to keep its political structures intact while entirely abandoning its previous economic ideology of socialism and collectivization. However, that's because they followed through on a whole range of things in a very genuine manner that Gaddafi didn't do so. But I hope that that answers your question, but we can move on to another topic.
Okay, so I mean, we've heard a whole load of sort of internet commentariat talking about the Twitter revolution and the Facebook revolution and whatnot. I think obviously it's a lot more complicated than that, and you can't really win any kind of battle purely with tweets. But and we've heard, clearly the regime was trying very hard to suppress people's information transfer, and even back in the 80s you had electronic communications with these cassette tapes being crucial. So, I don't know, I thought, could you perhaps expand a bit more on sort of the role of electronic communications and, you know, and obviously quite a lot of these things are set up by Western telecom companies and even still managed by them. And you know, I heard about in Egypt, I think some, was it Vodafone or someone collaborated with the regime to try and shut down communications. And so, I don't know, is there something to learn from this, or?
I think this is a question for you.
Yeah, I think in general, as you mentioned, you know, it's with Twitter, YouTube, you're never ever going to win a war, even a football match, you know, between Chelsea versus Man United. So you have to work, you have to get your hands dirty, and that's what happened in Libya. Basically, even in the Libyan revolution, always we keep forgetting the international dimension of it, you know, not just from a military perspective, but from a legal perspective as well. The UN, you know, and the resolutions. It's very important. That I think that's things we should focus on, you know, and the right to protect. This is the issues I think which is legitimized or give the legal ground for many actors, you know, to coordinate the whole work, including the media side. Basically, more effective in the Libyan case. It wasn't Twitter, or even if you do some analysis about how many Libyans they have Twitter account, okay, or Facebook, yeah, at the time, it doesn't help.
Most of them were living in the UK.
Yes, Al Jazeera, basically, you know, very important. Al Jazeera, why? Because the work of Al Jazeera was excellent and very strategic. In one sense, you know, gives the Libyans, you know, a very, very comprehensive picture, you know. So what's happening in Nafusa, Benghazi, Tripoli, Sabha, Kufra, you know, it was coordinated and reproduced as if like one big picture. So if you are a Libyan and you're looking at that, you'll see, okay, the whole nation now fighting against Gaddafi, okay? That's I think, so they gave people voice on the ground. And I think they managed really to outsmart Colonel Gaddafi's propaganda by just doing that, you know, and I can remember at the time Al Jazeera was like, kind of like 24/7 working only just to help the Libyans, and they did something as well, very smart, you know. Every day, minimum, there were maybe 15 to 20 Libyans in Al Jazeera programs and news as a commentators or whatever. So you'll see a lot of new faces, you know, people in their 20s, 25, 30s, 50s, even people in their 70s, like Mr. Ben Halim,